The papacy changed the Sabbath. How often do you hear that from a Seventh-day Adventist? However, what don't you hear? Who the Pope was, when it happened. They never will mention that, and reason being is it's a junk claim. Now, I don't put all the blame on Seventh-day Adventists here, because some Catholics over the past century have made rather obnoxious and untrue claims about how we're the church and we changed the Sabbath and Protestants should come home because you still go to church on Sunday and blah 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 blah. So not all the blame goes out to the SDAs on this one, but let's take a look at the claim the papacy changed the Sabbath to see how even realistic a claim it is. Because let's take a look. Did the Pope in the early church really have the power to do something like that? Did the Bishop of Rome? Well, what we're reading here is Eusebius, Church History, chapter 24, the disagreement in Asia. Now, I've mentioned this before. The Eastern churches celebrated the Passover on Nisan 14th, 14th day of the Jewish month of Nisan. The Western Christians celebrated Easter on the 14th, or on the Sunday after the 14th. And Pope Victor, this is around the year 200 or so, he wanted everybody to fall into line and celebrate Easter on the same day, to the point that he, threatened excommunication on the Eastern churches. Well, a bunch of Eastern bishops, led by Polycrates, wrote a letter to Pope Victor, basically telling him, screw you. I, therefore, brethren, who live 65 years in the Lord, and have met with the brethren throughout the world, and have gone through every holy scripture, am not affrighted by terrifying words, for those greater than I have said, we ought to obey God rather than man, and that's Acts 5:29. And Victor got even madder, threatened excommunication, and a lot of the Western bishops, including them, especially Irenaeus, was kind of the peacemaker, and he's like, look, dude, 40 years ago, Polycarp and Anicetus, they talked about this in Rome, and they agreed to disagree. You're being a jerk about it. So, what do we see here? In the year 200 or so, the Pope did not even have the ability, he didn't even have the ability to make Christians celebrate Easter on the same day. Well, maybe it was later than that. Okay? Let's see. This is the 7th Council of Carthage under St. Cyprian. This is in 250 or so. Pope Stephen, there was a disagreement between the North African bishops and the Roman bishop about whether or not heretics should be rebaptized. Stephen thought they shouldn't have to be rebaptized as long as the triune name was used. I think as long as the triune name was used. And the North African bishop said, yeah, they did have to be rebaptized. Well, let's take a look. Here's what they say to Pope Stephen. Neither does any of us set himself up as a bishop of bishops, nor by tyrannical terror does any compel his colleague to the necessity of obedience, since every bishop, according to the allowance of his liberty and power, has his own proper right judgment, and can no more be judged by another man he himself can judge another. So, the bishops in North Africa, the Pope didn't even have the power to tell the bishops of North Africa to allow, not to rebaptize heretics, and yet we're supposed to believe that he convinced the entire church to flip over on its rear end and break the Sabbath and switch it to a different day. I'm doubtful. And then we have Pope Zosimus. I'm going to be reading from the Pocket Guide of the Popes by Father Richard McBrien about Pope Zosimus. He was in about maybe 418 or so, and Pelagius and his Padawan Celestius, they were running around North Africa, and they had been condemned by the previous Pope, Pope Innocent, and Zosimus made a very ill-informed decree where he said, look, I've read over these guys, I've talked to Celestis, I've read over their theology, and they're orthodox concerning what grace is. So he told the North Africans, allow them back into fellowship. And the North Africans, including St. Augustine, they said, absolutely, positively not, you're crazy. And Pope Zosimus later retracted his demand. Here's the quote from page 55. Zosimus' handling of matters in North Africa was even worse. He reopened the question of condemnation of Pelagius and his disciple Celestis. After reading Pelagius' profession of faith sent originally to Innocent I, but arriving after Innocent's death, and after a personal meeting with Celestius in Rome, he wrote the North African bishops to inform them that both men had cleared themselves, and to reproach the bishops for having acted in haste against them. The African bishops, including St. Augustine, were outraged. They firmly informed the Pope that his predecessor's decision must stand, and Zosimus backed off. After another council at Carthage in 418, on the insistence of Augustine, Zosimus addressed a lengthy document known as the Epistola Tractoria to the bishops of the East and West, in which he condemned the Pelagians and their teachings. So, what do we see in 418? We see that the Pope doesn't even have the ability to tell the North African bishops to allow heretics into their fellowship, and yet the SDAs want us to believe that the Pope had the ability to completely change the Sabbath day and to have Christians empire-wide break the fourth commandment. I don't buy it, neither should you, and this should really be shown to an SDA to make them think about this bogus history claim.